Captain Jake Morrison walked slowly through the huge crystal halls of the Galactic Tribunal. His boots made soft sounds on the smooth floor that seemed to glow with its own light. The air felt thick and heavy, filled with the sounds of hundreds of alien voices speaking in languages he could barely understand. Each word seemed to carry the weight of judgment. That judgment was not in humanity's favor. The captain kept his hands behind his back, trying to look calm even though his heart was beating fast. Around him, the greatest minds and leaders from across the galaxy had gathered for one purpose. They were here to decide what to do with the human race. After 50 years of contact with other species, the verdict was finally coming. Jake looked up at the massive dome above him. It was made of some kind of crystal that showed images of space, with stars and planets moving slowly across its surface. Somewhere among those stars was Earth, his home world, waiting to hear its fate. He wondered if his family was watching. The news feeds if his daughter was scared. If his wife was praying for good news that would never come. The Vorthok representative stood up from his seat. He was tall and covered in dark green scales that caught the light. His yellow eyes looked at Jake with something that seemed like disgust. When he spoke, his voice sounded like a snake hissing. "Captain Morrison," the Vorthok said, "your species has been given every chance to join our peaceful galaxy. We welcomed you with open arms when your ships first left your solar system. We shared our knowledge, our trade routes, our technology. We offered you membership in the Galactic Council, a place among the civilized races of the universe." Jake wanted to speak, to defend his people, but he knew it would do no good. The decision had already been made. This was just for show, a formal ceremony before the punishment began. Instead of gratitude, the Vorthok continued, "You showed us violence. Instead of cooperation, you showed us conquest. In just 50 years, your people have started 3 wars over border systems. You have taken planets that were not yours to take. You have built weapons when we asked for peace. Are there aliens in?" The Great Hall made sounds of agreement. Jake saw the Luminary delegate, a being that looked like it was made of pure light, floating near the front of the chamber. When it spoke, its voice sounded like music, but the words were cold and final. "Humans refuse to follow our laws," the Luminary said. "They terraform planets without permission. They mine asteroids in protected systems. They build military bases where we have asked for science stations. They do not understand the meaning of cooperation." Jake thought about those accusations. Yes, humans had expanded quickly into space. Yes, they had claimed new worlds and built new colonies. But they had done it to survive, to give their growing population room to live and work. The galaxy was huge, with billions of stars and planets. There was room for everyone if only the other species would see it that way. But the aliens did not see it that way. They had divided up the galaxy long ago, marking certain systems as theirs, certain trade routes as protected, certain planets as off-limits. They expected humans to accept these old agreements, to take only what was given, to them to ask permission for everything. The worst part was that Jake could see their point. From the outside, humans did look dangerous. They had gone from flying simple rockets to building faster-than-light ships in less than 100 years. It spread across dozens of star systems, while other species took thousands of years. To expand beyond their home worlds, they solved problems with new technology, instead of following old traditions. They asked questions instead of accepting answers. Admiral Lisa Parker sat in the gallery, watching the proceedings with tired eyes. She had fought in 2 of those border wars the aliens talked about. She had seen good human soldiers die defending colonies that the Galactic Council said should not exist. She had watched alien fleets destroy human settlements and call it law enforcement. The truth was more complicated than either side wanted to admit. Humans had not started those wars to be cruel or violent. They had started them because they had found systems full of planets that seemed empty, only to discover that some alien species had claimed them centuries ago and never bothered to use them. When humans began building cities and farms, the aliens had sent warships instead of negotiators. But try explaining that to a galaxy that had been at peace for 1,000 years. Before humans arrived, try explaining the human need to grow and explore and build 2 species that were happy to stay in the same systems. Their ancestors had lived in for millions of years. The trial continued with more speeches, more accusations, more evidence of human crimes against galactic law. Jake listened to stories of human traders who had ignored quarantine zones, human scientists who had studied forbidden technologies, human diplomats who had refused to accept no for an answer. Each story was true, but none of them told the whole truth. The human trader had entered the quarantine zone to rescue survivors from a space accident. The human scientist had studied forbidden technology to find a cure for a plague that was killing colonists. The human diplomat had refused to accept, numbered because the alien government was demanding impossible terms for peace. But context did not matter here. Results did not matter. The only thing that mattered was that humans had broken the rules, and in a galaxy built on following rules. That was the worst crime possible. The final speaker was High Counselor Zenth, an ancient being whose species had helped create the Galactic Council millions of years ago. When he stood up, the entire hall fell silent. His voice was old and tired, like the sound of wind through dead leaves. "We have tried to understand the humans," Zenth said. "We have studied their history, their culture, their way of thinking. What we have found frightens us. They are a species that thrives on conflict, that grows stronger through competition, that solves problems through force when other methods fail." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. That description was not entirely wrong, but it missed so much of what humans really were. Yes, they competed with each other, but they also helped each other. Yes, they sometimes used force, but they also created art and music and poetry. Yes, they were different from other species, but different did not have to mean dangerous. "The decision of this council is unanimous," Zenth continued. "The human species represents a clear and present danger to the peace and stability of our galaxy. They cannot be allowed to continue their expansion, cannot be trusted to follow our laws. They cannot be changed or reasoned with." Erupted in sounds of approval from dozens of different alien species. Jake felt his stomach drop as he realized what was coming next. "Therefore," Zenth said, raising his voice above the noise, "we hereby order the immediate quarantine of the human species. All human ships, stations, and colonies outside the Sol system will be evacuated and abandoned. All humans will return to their home world. A barrier will be established around the Sol system that cannot be crossed from either side." The counselor paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Humanity will be cut off from the galaxy until such time as they can prove they have learned to live in peace. This quarantine will continue for as long as necessary, whether that is years, centuries, or forever." Jake closed his eyes and thought of Earth, of the billions of people who would wake up tomorrow to find themselves prisoners in their own solar system. He thought of the colonies that would be abandoned, the dreams that would be shattered, the future that had just been taken away. But as the great crystal hall began to empty and the alien delegates prepared to return to their ships, something unexpected, along with the sadness and anger, there was something else. Relief, maybe, or hope. Because the galaxy had just made a choice, and maybe, just maybe, they had chosen wrong. 25 years had passed since the Great Crystal Barrier went up around Earth's solar system. Commander Kyle Bennett floated in the observation deck of Station Hope, one of humanity's farthest outposts, just inside the invisible wall that kept them trapped. The station was small compared to the massive alien structures he had seen in old videos, but it was home to 53 people who had volunteered to watch the galaxy that no longer wanted them. Kyle pressed his hand against the thick glass window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere beyond those points of light, the alien species that had judged his people were going about their lives, probably forgetting that humans even existed. But Kyle and his team had not forgotten about them. They watched and listened, using every piece of technology they could build to see what was happening in the wider galaxy. "Kyle, you need to come see this right now." Dr. Amy Walsh's voice came through the station speakers with an urgency that made him push off from the window and float quickly toward the main computer room. Amy was the station's expert on alien biology and behavior, a job that had become much harder when they could no longer visit alien worlds or meet alien people. Kyle found Amy staring at multiple screens filled with data streams. radio signals, and translated alien communications. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she had the look of someone who had been working for many hours without sleep. "What is it?" Kyle asked, settling into the chair next to her. Amy pointed. At one of the screens, emergency signals from the Galactic Council. They're calling special meetings, sending out warnings, asking for help from species that usually never work together. Something big is happening out there, and they're scared. Kyle looked at the data flowing across the screens. Most of it was in alien languages that their computers could only partially translate. But the tone was clear even through the machine translations. Words like crisis, emergency, and immediate action required appeared over and over. "How long have these signals been coming through?" Kyle asked. "Started about 6 months ago," Amy replied, pulling up older data, "but they're getting stronger and more frequent. Look at this pattern." She showed him a map of the galaxy with different colored dots representing the sources of the emergency signals. The pattern was clear and frightening. The signals had started from the outer edge of the galaxy and were moving inward, like a wave of panic spreading toward the center where most of the civilized worlds existed. Whatever is happening out there," Amy continued, "it's moving fast, and it's getting closer to the major alien civilizations. The Vorthok Empire, the ones who spoke against us at the trial, they've gone completely silent. No signals, no communications, nothing." Kyle felt a chill despite the warm air in the station. The Vorthok had been one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, with hundreds of worlds and massive military fleets. If something had happened to them, it had to be serious. "What do our other stations report?" Kyle asked. Amy switched to a different screen showing reports from Humanities. Other monitoring posts scattered around the solar system, same thing everywhere. "The galaxy is in chaos, but we can only get bits and pieces of information through the barrier." Kyle read through the reports from stations on Mars, Europa, and the asteroid belt. All of them told the same story. The organized, peaceful galaxy that had thrown humanity out was falling apart, and no one seemed to know why. "There's something else," Amy said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been analyzing what we can see of Earth from here." Kyle looked at her with surprise. Station Hope was positioned to watch the galaxy, not to spy on their own home world. "What about Earth?" Amy pulled up a series of images taken over the past 25 years. They showed Earth from space, a blue and green jewel floating in the darkness. But as Kyle looked closer, he could see changes in the images over time. "Planet is healing," Amy said, with wonder in her voice. "Look at these atmospheric readings. Air pollution has dropped by 90%. Ocean pollution is nearly gone. The forests are growing back." Kyle studied the data with amazement. When the quarantine had first begun, many people had predicted that humanity would destroy itself within a few years, cut off from space expansion and forced to live only on Earth. They had expected wars over resources, environmental collapse, and social breakdown. Instead, the opposite had happened. Forced to stop looking outward, humanity had turned inward and begun fixing the problems they had left behind in their rush to reach the stars. "It's not just the environment," Amy continued, pulling up more data. "I've been intercepting communications. From Earth, crime rates are at the lowest point in human history. Scientific research has exploded in new directions. They've developed fusion power, eliminated hunger, and somehow managed to house and feed 10 billion people without destroying the planet." Kyle shook his head in disbelief. "How is that possible? 25 years ago, Earth was overcrowded and polluted. Everyone said space colonization was the only way to save humanity. Maybe we were wrong," Amy said softly. "Maybe being forced to stay home was exactly what we needed." She showed him more data from Earth's communications networks. In the years after the quarantine began, humanity had indeed struggled. There had been riots, protests, and a period of deep depression as people realized their dreams of exploring the galaxy were over. But then something remarkable had happened. The same drive that had pushed humans to spread across space had been redirected toward solving Earth's problems. The competitive nature that aliens had found so threatening had become competition to create better technology, cleaner energy, and more efficient ways of living. The human need to explore had turned toward exploring new ideas, new science, and new ways of organizing society. "Look at this," Amy said, showing him reports of massive engineering projects. "They've built floating cities to handle population growth without taking up land. They've developed new farming methods that produce more food while actually improving the soil. They've created fusion reactors so clean and efficient that they're replacing all other forms of energy." Kyle read through the reports with growing amazement. Humanity had not just survived the quarantine. They had thrived in ways that no one had thought possible. "The aliens were watching us too," Amy added, pulling up intercepted alien surveillance reports. "At least they were until recently. Their spy satellites and monitoring stations have been documenting everything we've achieved." Kyle looked at the alien reports, translated by their computers into broken but understandable English. The tone had changed dramatically over the years. Early reports had predicted human collapse and had seemed almost pleased by the prospect. But later reports showed growing confusion and concern. "They're afraid," Kyle realized, reading between the lines of the alien observations. "The galaxy expected us to destroy ourselves, but instead we became stronger. And now they're facing some kind of crisis, and they're starting to wonder if they made a mistake." Amy nodded grimly. "The question is, what do we do about it? We're still trapped in here, and they're still out there dealing with whatever is. Destroying their civilizations." Kyle looked back at the screens, showing the spreading pattern of emergency signals from across the galaxy. Whatever was happening out there was getting worse. And the same species that had imprisoned humanity were now struggling to survive against an unknown threat. "We watch," Kyle decided. "We learn everything we can about what's happening. And we wait. Wait for what?" Amy asked. Kalal looked out the window at the barrier that surrounded their solar system, invisible but unbreakable, for them to realize they need us. Dr. Ben Carter rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the computer screen for the 100th time that day. The numbers were still there, still wrong, still impossible. But after 3 weeks of checking and double-checking, he had to accept that. His instruments were working perfectly. What they were detecting was real, even if it made no sense. "Carol, you need to see this," Ben called across the research facility to his supervisor, Director Carol Hayes. The Pacific Deep Space Research Center was humanity's most advanced science station, built into an underwater mountain off the coast of California. It was one of the few places on Earth where scientists could still study space without interference from the quarantine barrier. Carol walked over to Ben's workstation, her coffee mug in one hand and a tablet showing the day's research reports. In the other, she was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. For the past 5 years, she had been running humanity's efforts to understand what was happening in the galaxy beyond their prison. "What have you found now?" Carol asked, setting down her coffee and looking at Ben's screens. Ben pointed to a series of wave patterns displayed on his monitor. Dark energy fluctuations in the outer spiral arms, but not the normal kind we see from black holes or neutron stars. "This is something completely different." Carol studied the data with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 40 years studying space. The patterns were unlike anything in their databases, which was saying something because humans had been very good at cataloging unusual space phenomena during their brief time among the stars. "How different?" Carol asked. Ben pulled up a comparison chart showing normal dark energy readings next to what they were detecting now. Normal dark energy is random, chaotic, unpredictable. This has structure, patterns, almost like it's organized. And it's moving. Moving how? "Like it has a purpose," Ben said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Carol, I think this thing is alive." Carol felt a chill run down her spine. In her decades of studying space, she had seen many strange things, but the idea of living dark energy was beyond anything science had prepared her for. "Show me the movement patterns," she said. Ben brought up a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy, with the dark energy readings overlaid in red. Over the past year, the red areas had grown larger and moved inward toward the more populated regions of space. It started out here in the empty regions between spiral arms, Ben explained, pointing, to the outer edge of the galaxy. But look at how it's moving. It's not spreading randomly. It's following the trade routes, the communication networks, the places where civilizations are most active. Carol studied the map with growing horror. The red areas weren't just moving toward populated space, they were consuming it. Wherever the dark energy passed, star systems went silent. Communication networks stopped working. Entire civilizations simply disappeared. How fast is it moving? Carol asked. Ben did some quick calculations on his computer. At current speed, it will reach the core systems of the galaxy in about 18 months, the area around Earth in maybe 2 years. Carol sat down heavily in a nearby chair. 2 years seemed like a long time, but in galactic terms it was nothing. Whatever this thing was, it was moving incredibly fast and apparently nothing could stop it. Have you been monitoring alien communications about this? Carol asked. Ben nodded and switched to a different screen showing translated alien broadcasts. They call it different names in different languages, but the meaning is always the same. The void plague, the dark death, the consuming shadow. Terrified of it. Carol read through the translated messages with growing alarm. The proud Vorthok Empire, which had led the campaign to quarantine humanity, was completely gone.
Oh.
Their entire territory was now a dark void, where no signals came from and no ships returned from. The Crystalline Confederacy, another major power, was losing star systems every day and begging for help from anyone who would listen. They're trying to fight it, Ben continued, showing her military communications between alien fleets. The Ethereal Assembly sent their entire navy to stop the advance. The navy disappeared. The Kelton Union tried to evacuate their outer colonies. The evacuation ships never made it to safety. Carol felt sick as she read report after report of civilizations falling to this unknown threat. These were the same species that had judged humanity too dangerous to exist freely in the galaxy. Now they were being destroyed by something that made human expansion look peaceful by comparison. What do we know about how it works? Carol asked. Ben pulled up his analysis of the few scientific reports that had made it through the chaos. From what we can tell, it doesn't just destroy things. It consumes them. Matter, energy, information, everything just disappears. The space it leaves behind isn't empty. It's nothing. It's like reality itself has been erased. It's impossible. Carol said automatically. But even as she spoke, she knew that impossible things had a way of becoming possible when dealing with the unknown. There's more, Ben said grimly. I've been analyzing the pattern of how it spreads. It doesn't attack randomly. It seems to target areas with the most conflict, the most competition, the most military activity first. Carol looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Ben showed her a detailed analysis of which systems had fallen in what order. The Vorthok Empire fell first, and they were the most militaristic species in the galaxy. The regions with active wars disappeared before peaceful areas. Systems with heavy military traffic vanished before civilian trade routes. You're saying this thing is attracted to conflict? I'm saying it seems to feed on it, Ben replied. Every time the alien species try to fight it with their military fleets, it gets stronger and moves faster. Every time they compete with each other for resources to fight it instead of working together, it spreads more quickly. Carol stared at the data with a growing sense of understanding and dread. The galaxy spent 50 years telling us that humans were too competitive, too aggressive, too focused on conflict.
Oh.
But this thing feeds on exactly those traits. And the aliens can't stop being what they are, Ben added. Even facing extinction, they're still competing with each other, still trying to save themselves first, still approaching this as a military problem that can be solved with bigger weapons and stronger defenses. Carol stood up and walked to the large window that showed the dark ocean outside their underwater facility. Schools of fish swam past in perfect coordination, working together to find food and avoid predators. Nature had learned long ago that cooperation was often better than competition for survival. Ben, I want you to prepare a full report on everything we've learned about this void plague, Carol said. Include all our theories about how it works and what it's targeting. What are you planning? Ben asked. Carol turned away from the window and looked at her young colleague with determination in her eyes. I'm going to contact the surface. It's time for humanity to make a choice. What choice? Whether we're going to sit here and wait for the end of the galaxy, or whether we're going to try to save the people who threw us away? Ben looked at her with surprise. You want to help them? And after everything they did to us? Carol thought about the billions of alien beings who were dying out there, victims of forces they couldn't understand or control. She thought about the children on alien worlds who would never grow up, the artists who would never create another work, the scientists who would never make another discovery. They were wrong about us, Carol said quietly, but that doesn't mean we should be wrong about them. President Helen Garcia stood in the secure communication room deep beneath the United Earth Government building in Geneva. The room had been built 25 years ago when the quarantine began, designed to send messages through the barrier that surrounded their solar system. For most of those years, it had been used only to monitor alien communications. Today, for the first time since the Great Trial, it would be used to speak directly to the Galactic Council. Are you ready, Madam President? Asked Dr. Ian Brooks, humanity's leading expert on the Void Plague. He had spent the last 6 months studying every piece of data they could gather about the dark force that was destroying the galaxy. His face was pale and tired from weeks of sleepless nights, but his eyes were bright with determination. Helen nodded and looked at the large screen in front of her. In a few minutes, her image would appear before the emergency session of the Galactic Council. The same council that had condemned her species to isolation. She wondered how many of the original members were still alive, or if their worlds had already been consumed by the spreading darkness. Remember, Dr. Brooks said quietly, they're desperate now, but they're still proud. They'll want to reject our help at first, just because it comes from us. I understand, Helen replied. She had been a diplomat before becoming president, and she knew how to deal with pride and fear. Begin transmission. The screen flickered to life, showing the great crystal chamber where humanity had been judged decades ago. But the chamber looked different now. Many of the seats were empty, and the aliens who remained looked frightened and exhausted. Their proud postures were gone, placed by the hunched shoulders of people who had seen too much death. Helen saw familiar faces among the survivors. High Counselor Zenth was still there, though he looked much older and frailer than before. The Luminari delegate floated in her usual spot, but her light seemed dimmer. A few Vorthok representatives sat in what had once been a much larger section, the remnants of an empire that no longer existed. Honored delegates of the Galactic Council, Helen began, her voice steady and calm despite the importance of the moment. I am President Helen Garcia of the United Earth Government. I come before you today not as an enemy, but as someone who wants to help. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Several aliens jumped to their feet, making angry sounds in languages that the translation system struggled to convert to English. Helen caught words like mockery, insult, and impossible among the chaos of voices. General Thrak, one of the surviving Vorthok commanders, stepped forward. His scales were scarred and dull, and his uniform showed signs of recent battle. You dare to appear before us now, human, he hissed through the translator. Your species brought this curse upon the galaxy. The Void Plague appeared shortly after. We imprisoned you. This is your revenge for our judgment. Helen had expected this accusation. In their fear and desperation, it was natural for the aliens to look for someone to blame. General Thrak, she replied calmly. Our scientists have been studying the Void Plague since it first appeared. We have proof that it existed long before humans ever left Earth. It was dormant in the dark spaces between galaxies, waiting for the right conditions to awaken. Lies, another alien delegate shouted. You created this weapon to punish us. Dr. Brooks stepped forward and activated a holographic display that showed their research data. The energy signatures we've detected match theoretical models for dark matter entities that our scientists proposed 15 years ago. The mathematics are available for your review. High Counselor Zenth raised one ancient hand, and the chamber slowly fell silent. His voice was weak, but still carried authority. Even if you speak the truth about the plague's origin, why should we trust you now? Your species has shown nothing but aggression and defiance. Helen took a deep breath. This was the moment she had prepared for the chance to explain what humanity had learned during their years of isolation. Counselor Zenth, you are right that humans have been competitive and aggressive. But during our quarantine, we have learned something important. We have learned that our greatest strength is not in fighting each other, but in working together. G gestured to Dr. Brooks, who began displaying images and data from Earth over the past 25 years. The aliens watched in silence as they saw the transformation of humanity's homeworld. We have healed our planet, Helen continued. We have ended hunger, eliminated pollution, and learned to live in harmony with our environment. We have channeled our competitive nature into cooperation, our aggressive tendencies into problem-solving. The Luminary delegate's voice chimed. Softly, these achievements are impressive, but how do they help us against the void plague? Dr. Brooks answered, his voice filled with the excitement of scientific discovery, because we understand what the plague is and how it works. It's not just a force of destruction. It's a living entity that feeds on conflict and competition. He showed them his analysis of the plague's spread patterns. Look at how it moves. It doesn't attack randomly. It targets areas with the most military activity first. Systems with ongoing wars, regions where species compete aggressively for resources. Every time you fight it with your military fleets, Helen added, you make it stronger. Every time you compete with each other for resources to fight it instead of sharing them, you feed its growth. Every act of aggression, every territorial dispute, every moment of conflict gives it more power. The chamber erupted in angry voices again. Several delegates stood up and began shouting that humans were trying to trick them, that this was some elaborate deception to gain power over the survivors. But General Thrak was studying the data carefully. As a military commander, he understood patterns of attack and defense better than most. The human is right about the targeting, he said slowly. The plague hit our most militarized systems first. Our most peaceful colonies survived the longest. Helen pressed her advantage. The solution requires something your current system cannot provide. It requires true cooperation, not the hierarchical submission your council has always demanded. It requires every species to share their knowledge freely, to work as equals toward a common goal. That is impossible, declared the ethereal assembly representative. The natural order requires structure, leadership, control. Without hierarchy, there is only chaos. With respect, Helen replied, chaos is exactly what the plague feeds on. The solution we propose requires what you have always said humans lack: the ability to put aside competition and work in perfect harmony. Dr. Brooks displayed their theoretical solution on the holographic projector. It was elegant in its simplicity but required a level of trust and cooperation that the galaxy had never achieved. Every species would need to share their most advanced technology freely, he explained. The Kelton energy manipulation techniques, the Meridian navigation systems, the Crystalline Confederacy's communication networks. Even humanity's recent breakthroughs in fusion and environmental restoration. More than that, Helen added, requires dismantling the competitive power structures that have governed the galaxy for millions of years. No more territorial claims, no more trade monopolies, no more military hierarchies. Every decision would be made by consensus, with every species having an equal voice. The silence that followed was deafening. Helen could see the aliens struggling with concepts that went against everything their civilizations had been built on. Finally, Counselor Zenth spoke. What you propose would mean the end of our way of life, the destruction of everything we have. Built over millions of years, yes? Helen said simply. But the alternative is the end of all life in the galaxy. Transmission ended with no agreement, no resolution. Only the promise that the Council would consider humanity's proposal. Helen knew that most of them would reject it, unable to abandon the systems that had defined their existence for so long. But as she left the communication room, she felt a small spark of hope. Fear was a powerful motivator, and the aliens were finally afraid enough to consider the impossible. Captain Rick Thompson stood on the bridge of the New Dawn, looking out at a sight no human had seen for 25 years. Stars without barriers, open space without walls. The quarantine field around Earth's solar system had been turned off. 6 months ago, now the first mixed-species ship in galactic history was flying toward the edge of the void plague. The ship around him was unlike anything that had ever been built before. Instead of the sleek military designs favored by most alien species, or the functional colony ships humans had once used, the new dawn looked like something grown rather than built. Curves flowed into curves, and every surface seemed to serve multiple purposes. "Captain, all stations report ready," said Commander Nina Patel, his second-in-command. Nina had spent years learning how to coordinate crews of different species, something that no military academy in the galaxy had ever taught. Her voice was calm, but Rick could hear the excitement underneath. They were about to test everything. Humanity had learned about cooperation. Rick looked around his bridge at the most unusual crew ever assembled. A tall Meridian with crystal-like skin worked alongside a human engineer named Tony Kim. Their species had been enemies for centuries, but here they shared data and made decisions together as if they had been partners their whole lives. Near the communications console, Dr. Rachel Murphy, humanity's expert on alien psychology, worked with a Luminari delegate whose light pulsed in patterns that meant deep concentration. They were preparing for the most dangerous part of their mission, the moment when they would try to communicate with the void plague itself. "Status on the hybrid systems," Rick asked. Tony Kim looked up from his console, his face bright with excitement. "All systems are working better than we hoped, Captain. The Meridian navigation computers are talking perfectly with our quantum drives. The Luminari energy systems are boosting our power output by 40%. The Kelton shields are stronger than anything any single species could build." Rick nodded with satisfaction. The new dawn was proof that cooperation could create things more powerful than any one species could achieve alone. Every system on the ship was a combination of technologies from different worlds, designed not by competition but by collaboration. 6 months ago, when President Garcia had made her offer to the Galactic Council, most alien species had rejected it. They could not imagine giving up their ancient hierarchies, their territorial claims, their competitive ways of life. But a few species had been desperate enough to try. The Meridians had been the first to accept. Their homeworlds were directly in the path of the advancing plague, and their leaders had realized that pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. The Luminari had followed, bringing their energy manipulation technology. The Keltons had joined when their evacuation fleets had been consumed by the darkness. Each species had brought their greatest technological achievements and shared them freely with the others. No patents, no trade secrets, no conditions. For the first time in galactic history, different species were working as true equals. "Captain," called Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez from the sensor station, "we're approaching the plague boundary. Readings are off the charts." Rick looked at the main screen, which showed the edge of the void plague as a wall of absolute darkness. It was not black like the normal emptiness of space. It was nothing, an absence so complete that it hurt to look at directly. "Take us to full stop," Rick ordered. "Dr. Murphy, are you ready?" Rachel Murphy looked up from her console, her face pale but determined. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this, Captain. Remember, we're not going to fight this entity. We're going to offer it something it has never encountered before." The plan was simple in theory, but terrifying in practice. Instead of attacking the void plague with weapons, instead of trying to defend against it with shields, they were going to open their ship completely and invite the entity inside. They would share their unified consciousness, their cooperative spirit, their vision of what the galaxy could become. "All hands, this is the captain," Rick announced over the ship's communication system. "We are about to make contact with the void plague. Remember, we are not enemies here. We are not competitors. We are partners working toward the same goal." He paused, thinking about how strange those words would have sounded to the galaxy that had once judged humanity too dangerous to exist. Every species on this ship has something unique to offer. Every person here has knowledge and skills that no one else possesses. Together, we are stronger than any of us could be alone. "Beginning approach," Tony Kim reported. Slowly toward the wall of darkness, its hybrid engines running silently as they drew closer. The darkness seemed to reach out toward them like living tendrils. The ship's sensors detected energy patterns unlike anything in their databases, structures that seemed to exist in dimensions beyond normal space. "It's scanning us," Rachel Murphy reported, watching her instruments with fascination rather than fear. "The entity is trying to understand what we are," Rick said. "Lower all shields. Okay, open all communications channels. Show it everything we are." What happened next defied all expectations. Instead of being consumed by the darkness, the new dawn became surrounded by it. The void plague flowed around the ship like water, touching every surface, examining every system, reading every mind. Rick felt the entity's presence in his thoughts, ancient and vast and filled with a hunger that had existed since before the first stars were born. But as it touched his mind, he felt something else: confusion, wonder, something the entity had never experienced before. Through the ship's communication system, he could hear his crew members speaking in dozens of different languages as the entity touched each of them. But instead of fear, their voices carried excitement, curiosity, even compassion for this ancient being that had known only conflict and competition for so long. "It's working," Rachel Murphy whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The entity is confused because we're not fighting each other, we're not competing, we're sharing everything we are with each other and with it." The darkness around the ship began to change. Instead of the absolute emptiness they had seen before, it started to show colors, patterns, structures that suggested something other than pure destruction. "Captain," called a Meridian crew member from the engineering section, "the entity is integrating with our systems, but it's not destroying them. It's learning from them." Rick watched in amazement as the void plague, fronted with genuine cooperation for the first time in its existence, began to transform. The hunger that had driven it to consume entire civilizations was being replaced by something else: curiosity, a desire to understand rather than destroy. "Open a channel to the surviving fleets," Rick ordered. "All species, all ships, share our cooperation protocols. Show them how we work together." Across the galaxy, the message went out on every frequency, in every language. The new dawn transmitted not just technical information, but the living example of different species working as one. No hierarchies, no competition, no fear of sharing their greatest secrets. The response was immediate and dramatic. As more ships began following the cooperation protocols, as more species started working together instead of fighting for survival, the void plague began to retreat. The entity fed for eons on conflict and competition, found itself starving in the face of genuine unity. Across the galaxy, the darkness pulled back from worlds that had learned to cooperate, leaving behind not emptiness but new possibilities. Rick opened communications to the surviving galactic powers. "This is Captain Thompson of the New Dawn 2. All receiving vessels. The plague is retreating. We are transmitting our full cooperation protocols now. No restrictions, no conditions, no requirements. This is how we save everyone." As rescue ships reached liberated worlds and species began working together for the first time in millions of years, the galaxy slowly began to understand what they had gotten wrong about humanity. The most hated species had never been the most dangerous. They had been the most necessary.